That's fine.
Yeah.
But which of these things can I use? Which of these methods, methodologies, techniques, and deliverables can I use to arrive at the sweet spot where that they have an interest, but they don't have a commitment?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
when people don't love the discipline, because we're still a baby.
So I'd like to welcome everyone back to another episode of the XR Minds podcast, and for a new year on the UXR Minds podcast. Really happy to kickstart this year with actually a remastered episode. Actually one of the most popular episodes from 2024, and that was my interview with Darren Hood. Really happy to re-release this with some better audio, hopefully. In that episode, we covered many really interesting topics for people who are entering the field of UX or UX research. We focused on areas around misinformation or kind of the confusion, maybe when you're entering the field and you're wondering who to listen to, what to study, what to read, even the confusion around what is UX. So we discussed many things around that topic with Darren and got his viewpoint on how best to enter the field and how to kind of filter out the misinformation or the bad information, the bad advice that maybe you might read or see around on the internet. So it's really interesting, especially if you're entering the field and you're just wondering how to get started and make the best out of your early years in UX. So sit back, enjoy this remastered version of my conversation with Darren Hood. And again, thank you to Darren for coming on to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on the show, Dale. Yeah, excited.
No problem, no problem. So maybe just to start it off in the proper way, would you like to give maybe just an introduction? Obviously, I reeled off the different things that you do, but maybe it'd be good for our listeners just to understand in more detail what you are doing and maybe how you ended up, maybe not the long story, because we'll get into that later, but just kind of how you ended up where you are now.
Right. Yes. Okay. So my name is Darren Hood. I am a 28 plus year veteran of experience design, user-centered design, whatever people want to call it. Just don't call me UX UI, whatever you do. Sure, say it, not UI.
That's far from this podcast, so don't worry.
I teach at, I'll name the schools off for you. I teach at Michigan State University in the Masters of CX program there. I teach for UCLA Extension for their UX certificate program at Brandeis University on the East Coast of the United States in their program for user-centered design. And I also teach at Lawrence Technological University, which ironically is located in Southfield, Michigan, where I reside, just outside of Detroit.
There we go. Very nice, very nice. That's cool. So it worked out well for you, that one. Awesome. And so you mentioned before, so I'll tell everyone my age. I'm 31, just to give you an idea of how long you've been in the industry, almost as long as I've been alive, which is crazy if you think about it. So I'd like to kind of go into a bit more detail into like how that happened. Like obviously this is a long time ago. I was learning to walk when you entered this world of just gives a perspective on just how long you've been in the field, which I find incredible as well, that you're still at it despite what we find that today, what has happened to the field, which I'm sure we'll also get into as well. But how did that come about? So I imagine it was early on in your, I don't know, in your career. It's probably something you did from the off, I imagine. How did that come about?
It's gonna be fun. And I was saving. I purposely didn't say this during my little portion of the
No problem. I set myself up. Don't worry.
I actually started out my professional career, and I'm going to date myself, but I started off my professional career as a word processor.
Wow.
Now, what in the word? Now, people know word processing when they think about Microsoft Word. Well, there used to be machines that were dedicated to word processing. There was no Microsoft Word.
So this is even before that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I started out my career. My first full-time job was actually as a delivery person. But then after that, it was as a word processor. So this was my advent into technology with this kind of stuff. And I was always at the top of that field, an expert in certain systems. I had my full-time job, and then I went to companies at night because everybody knew. So I knew was, and I would make a lot of money doing that kind of stuff.
Mm.
But for that day and time,
Yeah.
but fast forward, I ended up being a salesperson. I ended up being a customer service person. And then that's when the change happened.
Okay.
Working as a customer service person,
Mhm.
processing benefits, the
Okay.
advent of the internet comes along and everybody's
Mm.
rushing to get on the
Mm.
internet.
Yeah.
And as everybody's rushing to get on the internet, I was always the guy that people would call when something technological
Yeah.
would come up. And
Mhm.
so I was doing some work with a nonprofit and they wanted to go get on the internet like everybody else. The
Mm.
days of shareware,
Yeah.
shareware at the time. I said, you know what? I can help. I can let me figure things out and I'll
Mm.
take it for you. And I started doing things that I know what the technical terms are now. I
Mm.
started at information architecture. I started trying to make sure that things were intuitive. I started trying to make sure we had the right labels and the right nomenclature, the
Mm.
taxonomies.
Yeah.
I started looking at all these things. I started looking at cognitive load. Of course, I didn't call it cognitive load. Looking at contrast, want to make sure the contrast, not knowing that I was doing accessibility related things.
Sure.
I entered the field and I just immediately fell in love with it. And like a lot of
Wow.
people who got into UX, I mean, people are choosing
Yeah.
into UX now,
Mm.
but then it was more of a discovering by accident.
Yeah.
Almost everyone we talked to discovered it by accident. And so
Sure.
that was my venture into the field. And
Wow.
then I became an instructional designer full time.
Mhm.
Okay. I was doing training before that, but I started doing that full time and then doing what we now call UX part time in the evenings, which
Mm.
turned into doing it part time during my day job. And I'm like, you know what? I just love this. And in 2005, I started doing UX work on a full time basis.
Okay, so 2005. Okay, so this was this? I'm trying to think of the word. Maybe I edit this part out. Where do I want to go with this? Okay, yeah. So was this due to just your passion for obviously what you were learning, or was it more
Yes.
about okay, it's a very new industry. It's also a good time to enter it as well because it is like emerging. So
Yeah. I had no idea. I was just following my passion.
okay, you're just following your passion.
Yeah. When I did that work for that nonprofit, I started doing that work part time in the evening. So I started a freelancer
Okay,
in the evenings,
okay.
and so it was this steady passion,
Mm,
and I just learned, and I kept learning more. I started buying more
yeah,
books. I started building. I do a lot of book recommendations, and as I'm sure you
yeah,
know,
absolutely.
that's
Yeah,
when okay, book says a lot. Okay, because we didn't
mm,
have
no.
degree programs.
Mm-mm.
You didn't have. I mean, they were starting, but they were usually master's programs, and I
Okay.
didn't. I mean, I had associates in 1991, and I didn't get my degree until 2006. Was
Okay.
when I finished my master's degree. So I wasn't thinking about a master's degree. I was
No.
doing good stuff. So for me,
Yeah.
it was all conferences. It was
Yeah.
all online websites that you could sit and just
Sure.
study hours. So I
Yeah.
was self-taught.
Exactly. I was about to say that because that's kind of the route I took. So your kind of background in a more elongated version is similar to mine in a more condensed version. Like I have a tech hardware background. I started out repairing computers, PCs. I was the guy that people came to for this sort of thing. Then I ended up in customer service. So at Microsoft, a Microsoft project.
Mhm.
I always performed really well in, especially with the handling of clients and business clients and things like that. And I enjoyed more that side of building that rapport with the customers and also understanding their experience and understanding just talking to them. And that way you would find out a lot more than just like, okay, you want to cancel, okay, punch a few buttons and then let them on their way, which is what customer service more or less was. You're given a script and you just had to follow. I like to kind of go off that and try and understand a bit more. And from that, yeah, I discovered, but obviously I discovered a more established UX field, whereas you kind of had to, I don't know, understand it for yourself. So no,
Yeah.
it's really, really interesting. And what was it specifically about it that you loved? Was it a specific, I don't know, was it the human side of it, or was it just more the technical
I think
understanding all these different? Yeah, go.
I think it's just the journey. I enjoyed the journey. I enjoyed solving problems. I enjoyed the discovery that would arise from research. I enjoyed, of course, at that time, because there were so few companies that were not really involved. I was
Yeah.
involved with helping companies establish an online brand.
Sure.
And I did all the things. I know a lot of people think, oh, I wonder if Darren's a specialist. Specialists didn't come until 2011, 2012. So
Yeah.
for people who were doing the work early on, we did everything.
Yeah.
You did the information architecture, you did the UX research, you did all these things. I even went further than that because I worked for a company where we started and we were servicing credit unions
Mm-hmm.
across the country, and we established, it was my idea, went to them, pitched it, it was approved. We started a web design division inside of our company, so we were doing all of the work for, when we called it a web design company, but we were doing more than that because we were doing, I was designing logos, was creating all the graphics that were used. So I was doing a lot of that graphic stuff that a lot of people transition in today, and they don't transition in well, I will say, because that world is very ego driven. It's not very user centered.
Yeah.
It's what you want to do or about what wows or excites people as opposed to what's intuitive and what meets the needs, really hitting that sweet spot between user needs, business constraints. Those people don't do that kind of stuff. I was doing all of it, but I always maintain a user-centered perspective. But I understood the importance because I had a sales background, so I understood what that part of the business was like. And so that was that all part of who I was.
That's really interesting. So yeah, because back then, like you said, there was no specialization. Like now you can also, I want to do only research, I want to do only, you had to do everything and also back then, I don't know if it's what you're referring to in that specific role that you were doing there. I suppose all the research, the design, you're kind of learning it as you went along. Obviously you're reading resources, different things. Were there back then like structured frameworks and structured just ways and processes to do things? You're laughing, so I guess that's
and you'll also hear a lot of people who got into UX early. We learned a lot of things as we went along, and I'll throw an asterisk on it because we were learning things as we went. However, truth be told, a lot of what we do is very commonsensical. That's why when I did that first project, it was just common sense to make sure things were easy to use. It was common sense to make sure that contrast was good, or people weren't able to see. I'm firmly of the belief that a lot of what we do in UX is very commonsensical, and then we just, now we have frameworks around things. Now we have a lot of structure, but it really is all birthed out of common sense. I mean, the convention, people say that's really what it is. If you pay attention to that, and
of course,
the shirt tails of emotional intelligence, which I also felt was a part of that. You can't help but be successful at
that's true. And I think as well now, because there is such an abundance of all of these like buzzwords and frameworks and design thinking and things like this, which I like to try and avoid, that sometimes you have all of these different things that it even hinders you because you're looking to try and fit into a framework and you don't use common sense anymore. You completely ignore your own thinking in your own way to look at things and kind of step outside of that and think, wait a minute, let's just look at this just as a human. Like this framework just isn't going to work. It's going to actually add more work. We're going to miss things. We're not going to really be focusing on what we're supposed to be focusing on. So no, I think probably it's better to enter when you enter than now, because now if you do want to enter the field, you're just inundated with information, and trying to sift through that is tricky, which I found.
Not only information, but a ton of misinformation.
Yeah, exactly. That's
prior to 2011, there was practically, I always mention this, and anybody who listens to my show has heard me say this 1,000 times. There was practically zero misinformation in UX prior to 2011. Practically zero. You could go to any conference and come out a better person. You could pick up any book and come out with a sharper saw. And then all of a sudden, when I always say that UX started becoming under siege in 2011. That's when a lot of things shifted, and not to our good, really to our detriment. And that's when misinformation started. That's when people started lying to get UX jobs, which started becoming very common between 2011 to 2015. They do what I call fabricating relevance. people who do things to try to seem like they bring something to the table. A lot of thought leaders today, they're not
Yeah.
thought leaders. They're somebody just trying to fabricate relevance, bring
Yeah.
themselves to a field where that they have an interest, but they don't have a commitment.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
when people don't love the discipline, because we're still a baby.
Yeah.
We're doing UX work. We go to a meeting. We go to a meeting, and there's 8, 9, 10 disciplines represented in that meeting. We're always the baby. We're always the one that folks don't understand. We're the only one that people want to democratize. We're the only one other people try to do our jobs. Nobody's trying to do the developer's job. Nobody's trying to do we're the only ones. And so we're still in need of caregiving.
Yeah.
We're still in need of ambassadorship, representation. And so you've got people coming in trying to make themselves relevant without understanding any of those things. And so a lot of negligence. There's a lot of things that don't get done, a lot of oversight or things being overlooked. And that's why the UX UI thing, people didn't even used to say that.
Yeah.
That nobody said UX UI in 2008. And I like how Elizabeth Rosenweg says that that's a conflation because the people don't even know what the slash means.
Yeah.
UX/UI. They don't even realize what that implies. So people don't understand who we are to begin with. And then you UX/UI. Well, congratulations for throwing more oil on that fire of misinformation, because now misinformation leads to a disconnect in value perception amongst other things. So yeah. So it's tough for people coming in because they get introduced with things that are not. You mentioned design thinking. Design thinking, according to the history, design thinking was not even intended to be what people think it is today. And it was something that was created by that original company as something they could generate as a billable factor. That's all. They were just trying to they took things that already existed. They removed the user from the equation. You can't remove the user, still have user experience. They removed the user from the equation. They did something that other people could participate in so that they could have more ownership and have more ego. So they're interjecting ego into something that is an ego-free discipline. And so long story short, it just created more misinformation. Now people think that's the way to go when actually they moved critical elements that generated proper user experiences and left it in the hand of design thinkers and a whole people who are infected with hubris and Dunning-Kruger, I like to call it. And those are fun. Those are things to push away to achieve our goals. And now they've invited them in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think like going back to the UX UI thing, like someone entering the field, like I did 4 or 5 years ago, you're hit with that. So then you think, okay, so this is what the field is. And then you start reading stuff, because when you see that, you think, that's the first thing I saw. That's what I saw these thought leaders putting out. So that must be exactly. So, and then you start along that path, but then you go so far into that then it's not too late, but you're so far into that when anyone does say, look, that's not really right, or then your back's automatically up. You say, this person wants to change, so it just sets people up for failure if they don't kind of take a step back as soon as possible. And also just like grammatically, the slash would be for this or that, and UI without UX, or UX. Obviously, UX is its own discipline. To have UI, you need the UX before, but they're not interchangeable. And I think this is the confusion, that someone who maybe has a graphic design background can just make it work and change it on their CV that, I do UX, I spoke to a user. It's kind of not what it is. So yeah, because I've seen that as well. Like, we speak to users in a few job interviews I've done. There are UX UI job postings, and I've been in the interview, and it's like, we speak to users. But then when you actually interview them in the interview and say, what are your processes for that, or how do you use those insights? What you're getting? And they have no idea. It's like, we just pick what they say, and then we go straight to Figma and try and guess on what it is. So, from your point of view, how can someone, if they are entering the field now, because I do have a lot of listeners who are studying UX or do love the discipline and they want to start off on the right foot, how does someone enter this field and avoid the misinformation? Because it can be hard if you're your feed on LinkedIn is just full, and also just to know like if this is what I'm reading, is this valid? Is this valid? Or how do you do that?
Man, you just mentioned some fantastic things there. It's almost, when I think about, okay, how does a person get started? And I'm going to be extremely rudimentary in my response to that, because you get started before you get started. And what I mean by that is there's something that I've produced. I think you've probably seen it. It's called the UX cycle of excellence.
Yes.
And it really is I call it a framework. I called it a framework one day, and somebody was so grounded in the word framework that they never heard what I said, and I had to like disconnect from that person. You learn to listen skills. The first thing that a person has to do, and I advise a person to, because this doesn't take a lot to do what I'm about to mention. These first two things, the UX cycle of excellence is a 7-step process, but it's the first two steps that I'm going to mention. This is how you get started. Get started. Number one, you need to properly define.
Okay.
And from a person entering, that would be properly understand. Try to understand what UX is. Get a base. Understand what it is, because you also need to start developing a filter. If you don't develop a filter, you'll be exactly as the story you just presented a few moments ago. You'll be 5 years in, and it's easier to learn something correct from the beginning than to something 5 years later, because you become if you don't, you become grounded in anchoring bias, and you will have made so many mistakes. You will have entered the discipline and done so much damage to the discipline, and now you become a problem. You want to be an asset. So in order to be an asset, you need to learn what UX is. I'm going to define it for you. I'm going to help you now, and you can decide whether or not you're going to accept it. UX is a moniker. Number one, UX is not a thing. I'm going to go and UX this thing. Really? How much experience do you have? How do you think how are you going to plan on doing that? UX is a moniker. In other words, it's a term that's used to describe a broader entity. UX is actually, I have an illustration. I think you've seen this as well. I call it the landscape of UX. It's an illustration with UX in the middle, and it has the 4 pillars and then all these other elements. Somebody actually counted that. I never counted them. Somebody counted it. They said there's 250 items in this illustration. 250. So when you say UX, and I say UX as a moniker, it's something that's used to describe these 250 things. Now, as you get started in your career, you're going to begin learning what these 250 things are. You're going to begin putting them in your toolbox. But you need to understand, first and foremost, what UX is. It's a moniker. When I say UX, it's a moniker. So think UX/UI, 250/1. Does that make sense? No, it does not. So it's a moniker. Number two, and not number two, and this is number two, that's part of number one. It's a moniker. Now, UX is what doing UX work involves trying to decide and determine which of those 250 things, or whatever your number is. Maybe you only know 25 or 30 to start. That's fine. But which of these things can I use? Which of these methods, methodologies, techniques, and deliverables can I use to arrive at the sweet spot between business needs, user needs, and constraints? That's what UX is. It's research, it's design, it's strategy, all rolled up into one, and then putting these things to work to achieve the goal for your business and for your users, because you also are the advocate for the people who use your product or solution. So that's it. So what is you define it. So that define it. Now, and there's a little bit of overlap. The second step is that you need to learn the fundamentals, something that a lot of people coming into UX don't learn. So what are the fundamentals? Back to that illustration. Feel free, anybody listening to this, feel free, if you never, just go to images.google.com and search for Darren Hood Landscape of UX. You'll find it. It's going to come up.
I can link in when I post this podcast.
Excellent. You learn the fundamentals, and the 4 pillars of UX are heuristics and usability, information architecture, UX research, and interaction and interface design. So it would be interaction and GUI. We used to call it GUI. These folks call it UI. It always used to be called graphical user interface. They shortened it, they took off the graphical, they took off the G, and they call it UI, but technically it's GUI, it's GUI. So, but you can't do a GUI if you don't know interaction design principles. So I grouped together into it because a lot of people doing GUI interfaces, they don't know Bruce Tognazini's interaction design principles. They don't know Ben Schneiderman's interaction design principles. So they just decide something. They do. You mentioned guessing. They guess. Experts don't guess.
Yes.
Experts determine. And if you are in UX, you're supposed to be an expert or working your way toward being an expert.
With experts.
So this is how you get started. Now, the question is, will you go to please don't do a boot camp. I don't, because they're very unethical and they're very predatory. But there are different ways you can go the self-taught route. There's enough good books to achieve that. Some companies, they don't want you if you don't have a degree. If you're forced to get a degree or you're inclined to do a degree, it works for you to do a degree, then you're going to have to look at what that degree, what they're promoting as part of that program, because some degree programs are not ethical either.
Yeah. No, that's true.
And it's about making money. It's not about, they don't have a commitment to the discipline. So it's hard to find a degree that's dedicated to the discipline. So that'd be my foundation for getting started.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that and making it clear as well. And like I said before, I'll link in that the image or even just a link to the post that you've made about the 4 pillars. So if anyone is listening and they want to get a good grounding in what UX is, then they can do that. Because obviously it's a choice as well. Not everyone wants to. So I always like to put that out as well. Also, just on the university degree topic, just off the top of your head, do you know any good like courses or things that people can do that you know of? Just also maybe because I can link those in as well, rather than someone going and because maybe as a novice or an amateur, you maybe don't really know what you're looking for. Like, I don't know if this is a good.
Exactly. Because it's like people shop for educational resources and they approach it as if they're grocery shopping. When you go grocery shopping, you know what you're looking for, you know the products. When you're looking for a UX program, you do not know.
No, exactly.
So you're going to be, that's why so many people go to boot camps. That's why people through Google is not a sponsor of yours, because I'm going to shoot down there because people go through it. And that's not it's not even structured as an educational solution because feedback is given by peers, not by experts.
Exactly. And you can be easily enticed as well by the fancy words, the buzzwords, the cool certificate. And that's not what it's about.
Not good at all. I'll give a quick and easy answer on this one. If people go to my blog at uxuncensored.medium.com, there's a post where I give recommendations.
Okay, cool.
For educational solution places you can go. It's more bent toward the States, but there are some other programs that people can enroll in if they're not inside the United States. There are some certificate programs that are viable, accredited organizations. That's something that people miss out on. When uncredited organizations offer you an education, there's a lot of things, they don't have the accountability to really be doing that. They don't realize that education is an institution. And there's a lot of people who try to educate with no respect for institutionalization, which is a poor value prop for the people that are in programs. You don't want to do that.
No, absolutely. Cool. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll link also. There'll be a lot of links on this, but useful links for our listeners, because I want to make sure that, because like I said before, I know many of our listeners are new or juniors. So if we can give them the right resources, then that's what this podcast is here for, and also what you're here for as well. So no, thank you for that. So now as we come towards the end of the recording, I just wanted to make it, again, advice for our listeners, but just if you were to, maybe this is some advice you received in the past when you were a junior or when you were new or whatever, what is, if you were to kind of, encompass a good piece of advice that you would want to leave with our listeners, a junior or an intern or someone, what would you like to leave with them?
The thing that stands out in my mind is I would encourage people, if you're going to be in UX, one thing you need to understand is that you never arrive.
Yeah.
So for that reason, if you're going to be in UX, you have to be committed to lifelong learning. Yeah. You will always be learning. You will always be unlearning. Because
awesome.
Information is such a standard part of UX today. There are things that you'll be exposed to that eventually you're going to have to renounce.
Exactly.
You know what? That actually wasn't so good. I used to think that just learning a tool was going to do it, and I found out I actually need to be more committed to the fundamentals. Tools come and go. They already have come and go. Everybody's on the Figma bandwagon today. Figma could disappear for 40 years.
Yeah, no. Yeah. It's true. It's true. Like when I started out, it was obviously there's Azure, there's a few others. I started using Adobe XD, and already, like, this is only 4 or 5 years ago, and already that's died a death. So yeah, don't get stuck to. No, but that's some really nice learning. In my head, like I envision it as a snakes and ladders, this unlearning and learning. That's like you're learning, you're on your path, you learn a lot of good stuff, and then you're going to come across something that you need to unlearn. And it's kind of, it's not that you're going back in your journey, but you need to take a step back and kind of relearn that aspect of what you've realized was misinformation or something that you maybe just need to realign again. So yeah, you need to just stay on the board. You'll never reach 100, but just got to keep going.
Never get there. There's always something else to learn.
Yeah, no, excellent. Thank you, Darren. I appreciate your time in sharing your journey, which was super, super interesting, and also sharing all of these cool resources and also your mindset towards UX, which I think needs to be also treasured in the industry at the moment, because there is so much, like you said, so much misinformation that we need to make sure we speak to the right people, and you're one of those. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.